Hi folks, Matt Harmsworth here. Welcome to the Ask the R podcast. Before we jump into today's podcast, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all our listeners. I've had a few messages about James's little appearances, and it's always nice to hear that. But one of the way the only way really that this podcast can grow, add real value to people that are struggling at the moment with their planning applications, is for you guys to get the message out there. So please do leave us a review, like, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff that I'm sure you're sick of hearing of from time to time now. So, episode 50. I can't believe we've done 50 of these now. Hopefully this one's slightly better than episode 1, but there you go. So first off, a little story. We operate out of little Ford courier vans, so the surveyors across the country have got those. I picked up a new one yesterday, got it sign written, all that kind of good stuff, which is always super exciting. And I was transferring the kit over, and it got me thinking, we've got all these pelly cases full of equipment, back cameras and survey kit and all this kind of stuff, but probably over 70% of these pelly cases are full of drone kit. And that got me thinking, that's not something that I talk about very often on the podcast. You know what? It's time for a sip of coffee. Love a coffee in the office. Always seems slightly naughty. And it got me thinking, we don't really talk about the drone side of things very much on the podcast, because and the reason for that really essentially is that a drone is just a tool. It's just a tool for collecting data, the same way a laptop is. It might be slightly sexier, might be slightly cool. There might be a lot of legislation that sits around it, but essentially it's just a data collection device, and it's what you do with that data that determines the usefulness of the equipment. So some say that they are essentially toys, and let's be honest, some of them do look like toys. So I just thought I'd take a bit of time out just to talk you through what drones are, the kind of legal side of things, what types of drones there are out there, and essentially what we use them for here within ROAVR. Maybe answer some common questions. So essentially, let's start off with types of drones. So there used to be two types of drones, multi-rotors and fixed wing, fairly self-explanatory. Multi-rotor drone takes off vertically and lands vertically, usually has 4 propellers on it, and it's called a quadcopter. They can have up to 8. That's less common now with modern electronics and clever redundancy systems. You tend to find that most are quadcopters. We've then got fixed wing drones, which looks like a traditional aircraft with a fixed wing, needs a runway or a catapult or some sort of launch mechanism. Some of them are light enough to be hand launched. We've got one here in the office. Doesn't go out very often anymore because technology's moved on, and we're starting to see hybrids as well. So they're fixed wing drones that still have 4 motors. Well, they have 5 motors on because one's in the front, but they have 4 motors on for taking off and landing vertically, and then they convert to standard flight once they're in the air, which gives you longer endurance. Endurance used to be a real issue, so that's how long the drone can fly for in simplistic terms. Multi-rotors generally have a battery pack on there that will give them up to half an hour flight. Back in the day when I started, you were lucky to get 5 or 6 minutes. So yeah, things have moved on quite a bit. Fixed wing systems can fly up to a couple of hours now. Hybrid systems tend to be about an hour, and essentially you can cover more ground. Most people that are using drones in the UK as a tool within their business are using multi-rotor drones. Reason being, you can take off and land vertically. They tend to have quite a small form factor. There's a lot of off-the-shelf solutions now from the major manufacturers like Sony and DJI and Parrot. There's a couple of others as well, but the biggest by far is probably DJI, who started off making flight control systems and components back in the mid to late 2000s, you had to build the drone yourself using parts, and DJI, based in China, started making flight control systems. Now, they totally rule the roost now. I would reckon they've got well north of 90% of the world's commercial drones and enterprise drones. So that's the kind of types of drones. Power. I hinted just now, the vast majority of them are electrically powered. They have removable batteries. The very, very small drones might have a battery that's just charged off your laptop, off a USB-C lead, up to batteries that have dedicated charging systems. They're lithium polymer batteries, and generally speaking, they'll last probably 500 to 600 cycles these days before they won't really hold a charge anymore. There are internal combustion drones, and those you tend to see in the larger fixed-wing systems. Another swig of coffee. And then finally, we're starting to see hydrogen come online now. The challenge with hydrogen is getting hold of it, but it's probably where the future lies in terms of long endurance, small size drones. Endurance comes into play when we're talking about potentially mapping large areas. The longer the drone can fly for, the more ground it can cover in that particular flight, which is awesome. Legals, this comes up all the time. It's misunderstood. It's a huge subject. If anybody wants some help with this, reach out to me. More than happy to have a chat with somebody. Essentially, I think it was around 2020. I think, yeah, it was 2020. Essentially, the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK is responsible for airspace management and aviation management in the UK, moved us from the traditional system, which I won't go into, to a risk-based approach. And there are various different categories which you can operate drones in, and essentially it's based on weight. And the reason it's based on weight is because essentially, very, very basically, the heavier the drone, the more risk it poses to people. The smaller the drone, the less of a risk it poses to people. So we're on a weight-based, risk-based system now. Essentially, any drone under 250 grams is virtually deregulated, and I'd probably get shot down in flames for this, but you can almost fly them anywhere. I would caveat there are obviously aviation restrictions, etc., but essentially, drones 250 grams and less are pretty much classed as toys. The CAA probably thought they were being quite clever doing that. They were keen to not criminalise little Johnny flying a toy in his back garden like we probably all used to do in the 80s. However, what DJI did almost straight away was brought out something called the Mavic Mini, which is on its third iteration now, which weighs, yes, you guessed it, 249 grams and gives an incredible flying experience and really good quality data coming off that. There are limitations around wind and endurance and things like that, but essentially they pipped the CAA to the post there. From 250 grams up to, I think it's about 2.5 kilos. Don't hold me on that. I'm not as up on this as I used to be. You start to get into what's known as the A2 CFC or Certificate of Competence category, and basically the A2 CFC is a training competency process that allows you to operate a drone in the A2 and A1 transitional subcategories of the open category. Basically, it means that you can operate larger drones closer to uninvolved people, and it's a bit like the old P4 permit for aerial work. The next step up from that is what we have at ROAVR, and it's called an operational authorization. So that's an annual, essentially a certificate to operate, from the Civil Aviation Authority, and your pilots have to be qualified up to what's known as GVC, or General VLOS certificate level. That allows you to operate up to 25 kilogram drones in UK airspace. So that's what we've got here at ROAVR. Basically, we fly everything from the little baby 249 grams right up to whopping great big 25 kilogram drones, which carry multiple payloads and are suitable for survey and inspection work. So there's a lot that sits within there. I'll give them a shout out, we use a company called Global Drone Training, run by a chap called Elliot Cork and his cohorts, I'll call them, and very, very experienced flight instructor. Elliot comes from a teaching background as well, so he really brings this stuff to life. He will, if he ever listens to this, he'll be totally criticising my presentation of the new system, but there we go. So yeah, and the final part of the legals, I guess, is just to let you know that even if you've got a baby drone at 249 grams, you still need to register with the Civil Aviation Authority and obtain a Flyer ID. There's a small charge for that, I think it's like 10 quid, and that's done annually online. So that's the legals of it. So you might be thinking, well, this is all very good, Matt, but I normally listen to this because I'm interested in tree surveys and ecology surveys for planning applications, and I find your little nuggets useful from time to time. Hopefully that's what you say. So you might be thinking, what on earth do we use drones for? Well, what we use drones for in ecology and arboriculture, essentially they are just tools. We use them for everything from taking pretty pictures to put into reports, to using them to verify tree positions using accurate systems within the drones, and more we're starting to use them within ecology for protected species surveys. So we've done everything from, and we're probably, again, I'm going to get shot down for this, I'm going to say that we were the first to use drones within arboriculture in the UK back in 2014. We were too early to market, actually, which is how we pivoted and started doing film and TV work before coming full circle back. But within arboriculture, you can use them for inspecting the upper crowns of trees. You can use them for ground truthing. Within ecology, we use them for everything for preliminary bat roost assessments, so we can stand off and we can inspect features that potentially from the ground you might class the building as having low potential to support roosting bats rather than negligible. That has massive knock-on consequences for the client. So by using drones, getting up there, having a really good look at the roof, any cavities, any crevices, etc., we can have a lot more clarity to feed into the reporting process, and we can also use thermal drones within that as well. So huge uses in ecology. And actually, one of the most interesting projects we've been involved with so far was right up in Orkney at the Marine Test Centre site. We were up there and we were flying transects, monitoring seabirds in flight and looking for large sea mammals like whales, etc. So that was a fantastic project. The guys were up there for a couple of weeks, I think about a year ago, something like that. So essentially, a drone is just a tool. It's just another tool in the toolbox. One question I do get asked as we come towards wrapping this one up is, what is the best drone? It depends what you want to achieve. Back in the day, it was quite usual for people to rush out, buy a drone, and then realise that they needed the training, the education, build all the systems around it. And crucially, what would happen then is that they would find that they bought the wrong tool for the job. So think very, very clearly about what you want to use drones for. If it's just taking pretty pictures, pretty much anything will do. Smaller the drone, the more susceptible it is to wind and weather, etc. as well. So that's one to bear in mind. The usual common questions, things that we get asked: how high can you fly? How far can it fly? How much do they cost? The world is your oyster. A good consumer level drone is now about £450-500. That is your bog standard starting point. They go right up to hundreds of thousands of pounds, as you can imagine, and everything in between. So not cheap things to run. And it's not just buying the drone, it's all the ancillaries that go around that, all the systems that sit around that to support it from a legal point of view, and even simple things like battery charging and stuff like that out in the field that people may not necessarily consider. In terms of how high, legally 400 foot, that's limited by visual line of sight. So if it's a tiny weeny drone, you can't really go up to 400 foot because you can't see it clearly. So, bigger the drone, the easier it is to see. In terms of distance, that's capped at 500 meters away from the remote pilot. But again, it's visual line of sight. So if it's a tiny little drone and you're flying it around using the camera, looking at the screen, then you're not operating within the spirit of the law, and essentially that flight is illegal. Because if you lose that video feed, there's no way you're going to be able to bring that drone back. So it's capped at 500 meters and 400 foot. In aviation, we always give altitude in feet and distance in meters, so a bit of a strange one there. And pretty much anyone can fly them now, right? Well, up to a point, they're a lot more simplistic than they used to be, but there are all sorts of things that people get caught out with. So the most common ones being the GPS. The drone has a GPS system on it, which means that if the command control link gets broken, the drone will fly back to the point where it took off from and land. Only if you set it up right, though. And there are lots and lots of videos online of people's drone returning to home at a height too low and flying into terrain or descending into water when the battery gets low, etc. So, if you are going to use one commercially, there's an awful lot to think about to make sure you've got the systems and processes in place. So, today, I would have you consider the possibility that drones are a tool, not a toy. And if you want to incorporate them within your own business, reach out. Always happy to give free advice and link people up. You can also go onto Amazon. I've got a book on there called Unmanned, a drone story. You'll find it if you stick my name in there, Matt Harmsworth. You'll also find the planning application hack in there as well. That book, it's a good read. It's about my journey. There is some salesy pitch stuff in there. There are some useful resources in there. I'm not gonna lie. Some of the legislation is slightly out of date now. However, it's a good read. And if you're interested in drones, it's probably a good place to start. That's it from me. Take care, and I will speak to you on the next one.